The world economy is in a crisis, is what we hear. Governments reduce social support. There's more right-wing populism. Isn't this the proof that without growth, nothing is possible, although Tim Jackson said the opposite? Let's start from the start. Mr. Altvater, I'll read out some headlines of this week. In Germany, there's only mini growth. The economic boom is very small. This is because the economic experts received new economic figures last Tuesday, and everybody speaks about a recession. Everybody is very concerned, and everybody speaks about GDP, 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 and growth, growth, growth. Is everybody stupid? Well, no, of course, not everybody's stupid. Because non-growth in a growth society means a crisis. A crisis is never something positive. A crisis is never something simple. A crisis is always a bifurcation that means kind of a crossroads. You can go to one direction or the other. And if you go to the one direction, you'll have populism and possibly right-wing extremists and riots, as in the UK, for example, and then it is expressed what you could see in the society for a long time, the crisis-like things, the anomic things, as sociologists call it. In other words, that you can't do certain things in a society and then something happens, what Tim Jackson called unstable growth. Without growth, society is no longer stable, but possibly society is not sustainable with a growth, and we are between these contradictions. So what do you have? Why do you criticize economic growth? I don't really criticize economic growth. I criticize the form of economic growth, which is capital accumulation. If we talk about growth or non-growth, we also need to talk about the individuals, and this was already mentioned. We need to talk about people's needs, about their growth fetishism, and sometimes unexisting growth fetishism, anti-growth fetishism, and we need to talk about the institutions. This was also pointed out by Tim Jackson. We need to talk about the social institutions where people are members, and these are capitalist institutions, and this is what makes growth become a problem, and this triggers the crises, and this results in this double character. On the one hand, we need to deal with nature, and we consume resources and things. On the other hand, we try to make as much profit as possible, that is, ignore natural rules and laws. We thus damage nature in such a way as it had never happened before in the history when we consider the past 200 years, and we need to change this. Ralf Krämer, this is not the way forward, but how can you tell this to people? How do you communicate with people? How do you tell them that growth is no solution? Because many people are concerned and also are concerned about their jobs. Well, we don't tell people that they need to renounce growth. This is not the question. The social problem we have is that for the past 20 years, the majority of people don't experience any growth in their income or their wealth, because growth is to be found on one side only. Entrepreneurs, rich people have more and more income, and the others haven't. This is why it is important to me to say that we should not only focus on this one debate. We ask ourselves the question, what do we need to change in social and ecological terms? How can we manage a change? Ecological changes is the main topic, but what does it mean in detail? We need to change the energy and the transport system. We need to rebuild the cities, the buildings. We need to redesign the production plants and structures, and we definitely need to change the lifestyles. But the problem is, how can we manage this? We were talking about the Green Deal, or you mentioned the Green Deal. The ideas are not new, but there seems to be a problem of conveying these messages. Mr. Altvater, if we want to change something, we need to look at the old system. Who benefits of the old system? If you know that, you know who your foes are. Who benefits of this growth currently? Everybody who lives on surpluses that need to be produced, that they can be paid. in what form do these surpluses exist, these excesses, for example, return on investment on financial transactions. And there were many surpluses in 2008, and ROIs were promised by the fund managers, by the bank representatives. They said 25% or more. This was the promise of Mr. Ackermann of the Deutsche Bank. He promised this to his investors, and they benefit of growth, and they are highly dependent on growth, because without this growth, these yields will not be possible. It's ridiculous to say that you can pay a 25% return on investment if growth is zero. This is not possible, of course, and these people know this. And this is why they are in favor of growth, and this is why they decided on a growth acceleration law. This is absolutely preposterous, but the Germans are not the only ones. The Brazilians did likewise. They decided on a pact for growth acceleration, and this even included a political program. But is it only the bankers and the politicians? No. Also, the entrepreneurs, the enterprises that were mentioned, they need profits, surpluses, because otherwise a capitalist enterprise will not work. It would go to the wall, and nobody wants to go bankrupt, of course. The party Die Linke in Germany want to have more people in the public sector, more workers and employees in the public sector. This means that they earn more and can then go to the department store and enhance consumption. Now, you say that you don't really want growth and you're very critical towards consumption. No, this is not my main focus. My main focus is what do we need to change? And I think one element of another society, which is also sustainable in ecological terms, as Tim Jackson said, is not really to focus spending money on material things, such as new cars, for example, but rather focus on services, social services, above all, schools, which are not really better, that one teacher can teach more pupils, but that there are more teachers, that the quality of education is better, that nursing and hospital for old people is better. This is the field where we want to have more jobs. And this is meaningful in social terms, of course, and important. I want to say something else. I would have preferred to discuss this with Tim Jackson instead of Elmar Altvater, not because we've got different goals or objectives, and not because I don't know about what we need to change, but I think it is wrong to focus on the individual people and the society as a society of consumers. And here I rather agree with Elmar Altvater. Society works the way it works because it's a capitalist society. People are the way they are because they are characterized by capitalism, as it were. Politicians do because they cater to capitalist interests. Well, what about a future investment program? Maybe you have the wrong starting point here, because you said you don't want to focus on consumption. You want to do everything that we can consume more. This is what you say at the same time. Well, what's the content of our new program? On the one hand, we need ecological changes. That means a lot of investments that are necessary to support regenerative energies, heat insulation, public transport systems, etc. You need to do a lot of things there. Secondly, we think that there are social requirements, a lot of social requirements. We don't want rich people to spend more on consumer goods and jet around the world. It is important that the society that produces prosperity uses this prosperity so as to improve the life conditions of people and enhance social services. Mr. Altvater, how can we bring this about? More investment, does that not mean more consumption? Do you think it's sufficient to say we get a little bit more green? We need both. We need ecological investments, and these investments also go hand in hand with growth. But we need to consider the issue of distribution, because if we only said we have to do with less, for example, then we would also have to consider the wage costs, because they would decrease, and then we all of a sudden have more growth, more investment, which we wanted to reduce with our renunciation. We need to thus consider the question and the issue of distribution. And if we discuss this, it goes without saying that we need certain investments so as to carry out ecological changes. It is not possible for us to say that we leave the streets the way they are and then we change the transport system. If we continue with the transport system, with the streets we've got, we will have more and more private cars, but what we want to have more public cars, public transport. This means that we need to improve the interfaces between individual means of transport. We need to include bicycle drivers, trains are important, cars as well, but we need good public transport and local public transport and make investments into the interfaces. We need to be able to afford this if we want to have the ecological approach. Mr. Krämer, I think you both agree, but where do you want to get the money from, Mr. Krämer? How expensive will it be to rebuild all these things, and who will pay for this? This is a very exciting question, really, because to change these things will mean that we need many billions per year, three-digit billion figures, and then we need to be aware of this, that we will need all this money. This will be financed through public funding, that is taxpayers' money. So we need much more. We need more taxes at the expense of people who have a high income. I think we need to tax those who are wealthy. Tim Jackson said we need to make more savings and invest. But I think this is difficult in economic terms, because if we do this under private condition, if private owners and entrepreneurs make investments, they want a return on investment, and this would trigger more growth. But we need investments without waiting for the yield, and they don't wait for profit. We need to redistribute this significantly, and this means that we need higher taxes. So the wealthy people should renounce certain things, and where can we find politicians who will implement this? Well, the question is always, where do we get the money from? We're talking about several tens of billions of euros, and this is, of course, a lot of money. But we bailed out the banks, 480 billion euros for the banks, for example, from one day to the next. We had all this money available all of a sudden to bail out the banks, and not only in Germany, but also in other countries. It was we're talking about thousands of billions of euros to bail out the banks. And then we get really excited if we say we only need 10, 20, 30 billion euros for the public transport system, which would result in public services and goods for the next generations. What about bailing out the banks? What is the profit or the benefit for the next generations? The result will be banks that will make investments, exactly what Tim Jackson said should not be the solution. These banks will want to have returns on investments, but this is not what the solution will look like in the future. Secondly, it is always a problem of distribution which is involved here. I agree with Ralf Krämer. If we're talking about spending, we also need to talk about earnings and we decreased taxes, income taxes in many countries in such a way that there was a lot of speculation. George Soros, for example, or Warren Buffett, they themselves say we need to pay more taxes because we want to live in a good society. How is this possible if there are not enough taxes for schools, for public services, etc.? There are rich people who say that they want to pay more taxes, but Ralf Krämer, as a trade union representative, maybe people tell you that you didn't do enough lobbying, because I don't think that we will have a capital income tax or a property tax. Why is this? whose failure is it that we don't have a property tax? Well, this again means that you need to consider the society at large. What interests are the most important interests? We, as a trade union, the Verdi trade union, we represent our members, and we say that we want to have a property tax, but we have not been successful so far. Also, with regard to other requirements or other demands we make, we say, for example, that property, there's a division in property. Some have a lot, others haven't. What about the wages? What about the benefits? The development of the past years is a negative one, and this is not because we wanted to have it, but this is due to the fact that politicians even weakened us, the trade unions, in the past 10, 15 years. We want to have higher income for the masses, and you need to fight for this. Well, in France, workers are unhappy with their managers. They lock them in. This happened in France, Caterpillar in Grenoble, for example, and a pharmaceutical company's manager was hijacked. Why don't we have a protest movement? Why don't people take to the street in Germany? This doesn't happen. Nobody really demonstrates for better distribution of wealth in Germany. Why is this? Well, we could ask the Taz Daily. No, I'm neutral, says the lady. Well, this is also due to the media. We've got a media culture which would even criminalize this, to call for people to lock in managers. This is almost criminal. This would be instigation to a criminal deed. Why should the media do this? Well, this is the way it is interpreted here in this country. And this also shows the overall atmosphere in our country. If you only say you have to change it, you, the trade unionist, it would be a bit too much. I think representatives of the trade unions wouldn't be able to do that without the society behind them. Well, there were several major demonstrations in the past years, and the organizers of these demonstrations were the trade unionists, but this doesn't immediately change the whole world, of course. First of all, we need to discuss in the companies, we discuss wages, working hours, and I suppose that Tim Jackson would agree. An important point is to reduce working hours. We need to have less growth of productivity or no growth, and this is only possible if people still have jobs but work less hours per day. And working hours, however, were increased in Germany in the past 20 years or so against our wishes of the trade unions. We don't manage to avoid this, to prevent this, because we didn't have enough support from the society at large. But this is something that you have to fight for in the companies. I suppose you want to reduce working hours but want to maintain wages. How should this be possible? Well, if productivity increases, you can implement this. You can say like this, we'll have higher wages or lower working hours without reducing wages. Economically speaking, this is no problem. What does it not? But it is not possible because capitalists say the increased productivity this money will go to the managers. This is a struggle of the classes. Elmar Altvater, maybe you can give us an example, a positive example of a good lifestyle where people are kind of role models, where everything is working, where there could be a ripple effect. Well, I don't believe that these types of examples serve for making a lot of progress, because these examples always have their specific individual story, and it's very difficult to generalize. There are thousands of examples in the world. There is a movement of cooperatives in Europe and on other continents as well. In the whole history of capitalism, there were always things, what B.P. Fonson from the UK called the moral economy. This is the economy which is not based on the profit principle. This was also a development that already existed, a small development, of course. You can find this today. You find trade unions. The Taz Daily was founded like this in the 1970s as an alternative daily. So these things do exist indeed. There were possibilities of co-determination, and the question of democracy is very important in this respect. And then there are also examples where these alternatives were included in the constitution in Bolivia and Ecuador. Tim Jackson pointed this out earlier. The Yasuni Park, the national park, for example, this is enshrined in the constitution, and this would be something that we could use as well. We should stipulate something in the constitution which represents an alternative, but we don't manage in this country. In Bolivia and in Ecuador, they managed to implement this. They've got ecological objectives in their constitution. They wrote, for example, that the nature is kind of a legal entity and thus can sue, that the ecology can be sued. But in Germany, similar things exist. We've got a similar legislation. We've got legislation to protect nature, but it is not in the constitution. I don't know if it is absolutely necessary. This is just a principle or an example for a good approach. And we can learn a lot from these examples. And we can thus see that these issues are not only important for Germany, but all over the world. It sounds very simple. It sounds like as if there were only a problem of conveying the ideas. But isn't this too simplistic? Don't you have to tell people you have to renounce certain things? Well, at these events and conferences, I think a lot of people are included who don't really know about everyday life. There are people who have a lot of pressure on them. You can not really tell them anything about the ecology because they are afraid that they might lose their jobs. I would like to say something about the development and why jobs are so important. We've got this mass unemployment. People who are afraid that they might lose their job are in a very weak position. There are more and more so-called mini jobs, interns, etc. People who receive income support, and they are then forced to accept any kind of job, even if it's very badly paid. And here we need changes in a trend, because people who are under this enormous pressure, people who don't know how they can make ends meet, people who don't know if their children will ever get an apprenticeship, well, these people don't really want to talk about giving up certain things, because how should they do this? But there are also calculations, facts and figures that prove these things, and there are facts and figures which prove that the global economy needs to grow by, say, 1.5% so as to maintain jobs. So you can maintain jobs only by producing more. This is what is being said. So this brings us back to growth. If we want to save jobs, we need growth, don't we? Tim Jackson spoke about the growth machine. A machine needs energy and fuel. This fuel of the growth machine, where fossil resources, coal, oil, gas, nuclear energy, and this was the fuel of the past 250 years or so. And if we want to get away from these fuels, we can't drive the engine, the machine, any longer. So we need a new basis. If we can replace the fossil fuels with other types of fuels with the same energy, this is something I very much doubt, because we don't know this energy so far. And if this is the case, that productivity will not increase as it used to in the past, and I think productivity of labor might even decrease, and then we will have the problem that we'll have to work more. We will possibly even have longer working hours if this happens, simply due to the fact that productivity will decrease. We replaced labor with new fuels, and we will have to replace this further, and this will change society, because fossil fuels are not there for the whole future. They are finite, and we will definitely need to change something here, and we should do this as quickly as possible, because otherwise it will not be possible. President Bush said this. Just a small anecdote now. He was a defender of the oil companies, and he thus knew about scarcity of fossil fuels, and he set up a committee, the Hirsch Committee, as it was called, and this committee had the task to find out what will we have to do after the oil peak, when the curve will decrease, so as to prepare ourselves for the future. And the committee in 2005 said we need to start change things 10 years before the peak. What happened? We reached the peak, and we haven't changed anything so far. We need a new direction, and if we don't find the new direction on time, there will be a disaster. We don't really need to talk about non-growth any longer, but because non-growth will simply happen in such a case. There's a second problem, the problem of the consumption of resources. This will not decrease in spite of better technologies. We've got fuel-saving cars. We might have energy-saving mobile phones, but we've got more and more of these appliances: a second car, laptop, iPads, etc. So what do you do in such a case? In spite of technological advances, the resource consumption does not go down.
Well, of course, the idea behind ecological transformation is saving resources, spend less resources. Now, this is possible upon principle. The question is, will it be sufficient? I'm not sure, but I think we have to do what we can do and act as quick as possible. And I think a lot can be done. Of course, we do have problems with storage media and other things, but if it comes to our energy supply, transformation is key, including solar energy, so that we manage to reduce our CO2 emissions and have them be, if possible, zero in the end. Now, that's our task. And we also have to cut down resources in other fields. And this is, if you ask me, not only about not growing or growing less, this is about shrinking. Also, with respect to incomes and the GDP, I'd say that it's still possible to differentiate, because the GDP is a monetary unit. And if it comes to doing with less or doing without, you can be much more concrete. Because if you go and say we have to save resources, you say that you devaluate property or assets. I mean, that's what people don't like. Yeah. Right. And that's why it's problematic. And that's why people hesitate and don't want to put it into the fore. But the question is, what can we do in order to save resources, in order to achieve our goals? And this is also not about no growth anymore, but it's maybe rather about a different kind of growth. Elmar, do you believe we can get a different kind of growth? Well, we have to try at least, I'd say. Because this is not only about the end of fossil fuels and limits, because we have generated the greenhouse effect, because we've burned so much already. But we are also dealing with limits once we use solar energy. I mean, the rare earth is also a limited resource, and you find it, first of all, in certain countries, and then the question is, how do we get access? Is it via free trade, or will we also use the military? So there are lots of questions we have to ask, including the questions of war and peace. So the idea of a transformation and a new energetic basis for our society is an extremely complex one, but it's a question to be raised by humankind and to be answered, because there is no other way. Now, Tim Jackson just said, Ralf Krämer, that we have achieved a certain level of wealth already, or property, and we can talk about it easily, or easier than the countries in the south who want to at least catch up. Well, of course, you cannot go and claim, on the one hand, every human being in the world has the same right to exploit nature, and we cannot go and deny them access to what we have. So their claim is a valid one. However, transformation has to be attractive also for the countries in the south, so that they skip the stage of environmental destruction we have had in the last 100 years in the West. And so that they opt for a sustainable or environmentally healthy way right away, so that they skip the dangerous stage, because protection, safety and security is key for the people there too. Now, Ralf Krämer says the ecological transformation process needs to be as attractive as possible. Others talk about the eco-dictatorship. Do we need it? No. God forbid. I've never seen a dictatorship in history which would be sustainable, ecological, and resource-saving, including human beings. Dictators. I mean, some ecologists think that dictators are ecologically sustainable, but in reality they are ecologically destructive. Democracies may be ecologically sound because they are based on the interests of the people, and people experience the destruction of the environment and don't want it anymore. But it could also be a democracy based on the market mechanism. And then you trigger a number of pathological mechanisms, and more resources are spent than it should be the case in an ecologically sound context. So I'm very much in favor of a democratic regulation, and I'm not in favor of any kind of dictatorship. But what do we actually need in order to transform, and how much regulation in particular do we need? We do need a lot of regulation. We need democratic regulation. We need self-government and the participation of the people, so that they can get involved and help establish sustainable structures. And we also need the intervention of the social state, the welfare state. I mean, the market, that's fine. But market in capitalism usually means competing private corporations which all pursue the goal of profit-making. The question is, what can be done in order to regulate society in a different way without having more and more competition? And without having competition, the main driver of society, there are lots of options. And it's clearly not simple. And of course, we all know the historical burden. But this is truly about more democracy, because the economic system we are having right now is not a democratic one. I mean, that's also something which gets me back to Tim Jackson and the ecological enterprises he mentioned. And nationalize corporations, would that be an option? Well, this could be an option. We nationalized enterprises which usually are, and for a long time were very much against nationalization. The Hypo Real Estate Bank, for example, has become a public bank, a state bank. But then we also have the public goods. And Ralf Krämer referred to this approach, and Helena Rostrom even got a Nobel Prize. So obviously even the Nobel Prize Committee is rethinking. So there are different options, there are alternatives. It does not have to be the market-controlled approach only. And there are attempts in order to control in a democratic way the access to resources, and that's certainly the positive message we should try and get across. Now, Tim Jackson said we have to rethink, and that's what Elmar Altvater has been thinking of as well.